Welcome everyone. Welcome Drea. Hi, it's good to see you. Oh, look at that together mode. That's funny. And welcome to all of everyone joining us from Bentley University with Professor Summer Marion. And let's go ahead and try to mute everyone if we can. There we go. So yeah, welcome everyone. Welcome our Trinity Fellows, especially want to thank Larry David and Drea Bergman from CGS with the original idea for this lecture. Welcome to my students from Brown University. Thanks for meeting outside of our normal class time to make this work. Welcome to those of us joining from Brazil, with students of Professor Rinaldi, especially our student presenter Antonia, who's going to be presenting a little bit about the Model UN Charter Review Conference simulation that they've just run, and a little bit about her own research, and that'll be in the second half of the lecture. We've got students from University of San Francisco here, and this will be recorded and made available for those who couldn't make it today. So quickly, our agenda, we're going to go over a little bit of the background and history of the founding of the United Nations. We're going to take a look at how it operates, specifically around the Security Council. We're going to look at Article 109. Article 109 as in the part of the UN Charter, this unused mechanism for reforming the United Nations that really hasn't been utilized yet, as well as the other UN reform efforts over the years. Then we're going to come to Article 109, the coalition, the modern group, which just formed and just really launched this past September. And in the second half of the class, we're going to be doing, it's going to be an interactive, open floor kind of situation where we'll have question and answer period. We're going to have two student presenters. The other student presenters from the University of San Francisco, Angelica, who is going to be presenting a little bit about how they set up their first students for Article 109 chapter, university chapter. And then we're going to discuss and try to brainstorm as a group what we would like to see in a new UN charter, what we could imagine the future of global governance looking like with a reformed Security Council or reformed United Nations, and then help work collaboratively to help co-design our student action plan and to contribute ideas through some live polling exercise that we'll do towards the end. So just a little bit about myself. I'm a political scientist and research fellow at Brown University's Watson School for International and Public Affairs. I live just outside of Boston, the United States. I specialize in computational text analysis and study of international law and security, from traditional security concerns to artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. My research really focuses on the intersection between international law, security, and cutting-edge technology, and the effects that international law and organization can have on solving complex global issues. Prior to this appointment, I served as a captain in the U.S. Army Infantry, where I led a mechanized rapid reaction force just south of the Korean demilitarized zone. And then I later served as a deputy director of the United Nations Command Honor Guard in Seoul. After I got out of the Army, I went back to Northeastern University, got my PhD. And then over the last 6 years, I've been a volunteer activist for UN reform, and specifically arguing for Article 109 and Charter Review. I got my start in the lead up to the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. There was a lot of hope at that time that memorial might be, or that anniversary might be used as a big moment for change. And then COVID hit and sort of derailed a lot of that process. But I also serve on the board of Citizens for Global Solutions, and I've volunteered with the Coalition for the UN We Need, including co-drafting the People's Pact for the Future, which is a civil society created version of the Pact for the Future that was adopted last September. And now I work in the Article 109 Secretariat as the Coalition's research manager. So I work to provide the Coalition with key insights about the historical context of Article 109, as well as ongoing developments at the United Nations. I help make sure that our team of diplomats is briefed and has the the most up-to-date information about the meetings that they're going into, to try to make their job, make their outreach as effective as possible. All right. So to start off with, it's really important to remember the context in which the UN was formed. The League of Nations was in place prior to the United Nations, both of which were institutions that were born out of the ashes of world wars. And it was this world war mindset that is really, really key to understanding the history of the founding of the Charter and the specifics of what's in it and why they, for instance, why the Security Council has permanent membership. So we've got Roosevelt here on the left speaking with Churchill. The negotiations for the United Nations Charter began in earnest in February excuse me, at the Dumbarton Oaks Conference in 1944. So in 1944, it was the height of both the European and the Pacific theaters. We have, the war is raging, and yet despite that, the powers of the world weren't waiting for the war to be completed before they started looking ahead to what they were going to replace the League of Nations with. At the conference, the Dumbarton Oaks Conference, these talks stalled. And so in February 1945, US President Roosevelt and UK Prime Minister Churchill, as well as the Soviet Union's General Secretary Stalin, all traveled in secret to avoid the Axis U-boats and bombers. They traveled in secret to the city of Yalta on the Crimean Peninsula to attend what would later become known as the Yalta Conference. So after a week of intense negotiations, a framework deal was reached between these three allied powers that really, they were able to kind of resolve some of the major outstanding issues concerning membership, voting procedures, and then also they established this permanent special status and veto power for themselves. Though not represented at Yalta, this privilege would also be extended to China and France, collectively establishing the group known today as the Permanent Five, or the P5. Now, this sort of having that framework set amongst those three major powers, the stage was set for negotiations to actually, for the actual treaty, the actual charter of the UN, to be drafted at the San Francisco Conference in April 1945. So at this time, thousands of diplomatic staff and representatives from 50 countries around the world would pour into this iconic city, only to discover that while there was a lot of specific legal text still to iron out, that the broad contours of the post-war agreement had already been decided by the P5, or really the P3 at that time, without them. Now, the delegates were furious. Above all else, they were outraged at the bald-faced indignity and structural inequality of these special privileges given to the P5, and this veto power that they were going to get. And indeed, sentiment was so strong against the veto that 31 out of 50 states there went on record. They made public statements or submitted motions to change the veto. They wanted to have their voices known because they were absolutely opposed. Actually, I mean, there were 54 states that were involved in the drafting of the UN Charter. It's fair to say that 53 of them were against the veto power. It was only Russia. The Soviet Union laid a clear, bright red line for their membership. They said, they wanted to be able to block the United Nations from acting against their interests, and that was their one thing. Without that, they were ready to walk away from the UN Charter, this whole United Nations project, and the negotiations could have unraveled and walked away, really collapsed at that point. So what it took was a threat and a promise in order to get this really incomplete, really problematic UN Charter through, to get the rest of those other states to sign on. So, and it's important to remember, even the US was originally opposed to the veto. And so it was, they understood, like the delegates at that time, that giving one state the power to block the will of the majority of the rest of the states was going to severely undermine its legitimacy and its ability to respond in the future. But they were able to get it signed and passed through a threat and a promise. Now, the threat was clear. With war raging in the Pacific and beyond, state representatives were given the impossible choice of either accepting these incomplete, imperfect terms of the agreement, or to be left out of the UN system with the possibilities and protections that it offered, entirely. So the UN Charter was pitched as if you're against the war, then you have to be for the Charter. It was really a stark contrast. And the authors thought, okay, we know that this is a bad deal. If we could get 10 years out of this agreement, that would be enough. And then we can have cooler heads look at the rules and we can agree everything else in 1955. So that was the promise. The threat was returning to war. The promise, or the San Francisco Promise as it would become known, was the core of the bargain struck between the P5 and the rest of the delegations. So the deal was to create this two-tiered system in which the P5 would enjoy special privileges and this absolute veto power to block any actions that they disagreed with within the UN's highest governing body, the Security Council. And if the states were willing to sign up for this, then in 10 years or less, they would get the chance to rewrite the UN Charter from the ground up. That everything would be back on the table, all these special privileges, the veto could all be getting rid of as early as 1955, if not before. And US Delegate and future Secretary of State John Foster Dulles noted explicitly that it had only been possible to secure the acceptance of the charter at San Francisco by including the provision that there would be an opportunity to review it in the light of experience. So Article 109 was not intended, it wasn't something that they wanted to include the major powers. It was not something that was part of the earlier Dumbarton Oaks Conference or proposals. It was added as a concession at the San Francisco conference. So, they were not content to take this San Francisco promise at face value. The veto opposing states made sure it was explicitly written into the charter as Article 109. So this is the exact current and legally binding treaty text of Article 109 of the United Nations Charter that was signed and ratified by each and every of the 193 member states of the United Nations today. It remains legally in force, though unchanged and untried to this day. It's the legal mechanism for reviewing and updating the Charter, and the Charter was always intended to be a living document. It wasn't something that was supposed to be so fixed and set in stone and then never updated again. Honestly, they knew that having this separate and unequal system was not something that was going to last, and they thought, best case scenario, they would get 10 years out of this, and then Article 109 would provide a built-in reset button. So after 10 years, the least popular aspects of the charter could be amended and updated as needed. Now, the way that this conference would work, that's the full text on the screen there, but basically it could be initiated by a 2/3 vote of the General Assembly, and then a concurring vote of any 9 members of the Security Council. We're going to come back to this later strategically, but it's worth noting that the Article 109 conference itself cannot be vetoed, cannot be blocked from occurring. It's also worth noting this line here in blue. Each member of the United Nations shall have 1 vote in the conference. So this is it's hard to overstate the importance of this one line. So while these larger countries and the P5 have a lot of power within the Security Council, especially within the Article 109 conference, every state truly has the same 1 equal vote, which means some countries that have populations of under even 100,000 people that are really more like large cities, they're going to have the same vote as India and China, which each have 1 billion citizens. So the way that Article 109 is structured is very amenable to the small states and the middle powers of the world. It's a process that the Security Council has the least control over. It's where they have the least sway. And while they are able to ultimately have a sort of ratification veto, because any changes that are made at the conference will eventually have to go out and get ratified by the membership, and they will take effect once 2/3 of the states of the membership have ratified it, including all P5 members. So there's still a place where the veto can come into play, but that's only at the conclusion and the ratification stage of this. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later, why that's some of our options for getting around that. So at the conference itself, the delegates would conduct the difficult yet crucial work of drafting a new UN charter, truly something that they could draft from the ground up. They could make line-by-line changes to the existing charter. It's pretty remarkable how small this, or how short this document is, and yet how fundamental it has been for the world. And then once a suitable, they could replace entire chapters of it and bring in and ratify other existing treaties. There's a lot of different potential routes that could be taken. There's actually a group of scholars that have met that have been part of what's called the Second Charter Project, run by the Global Governance Forum, where they've essentially over a period of about 2 years were meeting frequently and have come up with a potential draft, one option. So that way the members don't have to start from scratch when we get there. So they've already done some of this work. And yes, so that's how, this is kind of like the general parameters for Article 109 and how the conference itself would work. There we go. And it's important to remember that that Article 109 was a small states broadly global South initiative. It was a reaction, it was a concession. It was their condition for signing the charter. It was drafted by Australia, Belgium, Brazil, Canada, Greece, Poland, New Zealand, and supported by Argentina, Chile, China, Costa Rica, the vast majority of Latin America. And it was truly a global South-led counter veto initiative. There were some delegates, including Dr. Bertha Lutz, a Brazilian delegate, and one of only 8 women at the conference out of more than 800 total delegates. So 1% was women were represented there. But Dr. Lutz thought that this provision, Article 109, was so important that the review conference should be mandatory and held every 5 years. So it was something that was debated a great deal before they ended up with the final text. So cheers went up just after midnight on June 17, 1945, when Article 109 was finally adopted after overcoming fierce Soviet opposition and difficult compromise. The folks in that room deeply understood and believed in the necessity of this provision. And this was the final breakthrough that allowed the charter to be ultimately signed 2 weeks later on June 26, 1945. So emblematic of the spirit of San Francisco, Article 109 it encapsulated this imperfect mix of realpolitik with a genuine optimism for a brighter future that the UN Charter itself reflects. So what's in the Charter? We're not going to go through everything, and this graphic is 10 years out of date, but as a recurring theme of this lecture will be, the UN has not changed in 80 years. So despite being this 10 years out of date, this graphic is still fully viable. So nothing has changed structurally in that time. But the signing of the UN Charter was profoundly different than all other organizations, including the League of Nations before it. First, it was truly the first universal membership organization that they're in the world. In world history, this was though not every it's not 100% of the world. We still have Palestine and non-self-governing territories that were left out, or that are still left out. But the vast majority of the world was now operating under the same set of rules for the first time. If you think back to the League of Nations, there was only 44 out of the 70 sovereign states at that time that were members. The US and China were not members. Members could just leave. So when Japan was rebuked for invading Manchuria, they just left the organization and continued to do what they wanted. The UN is fundamentally different. It's a formal and voluntarily adopted set of rules, obligations, and decision-making procedures that allowed the world to interact and cooperate and have a place to meet and settle their issues and work together in a way that really just didn't exist before. Now, so there's two areas that we're going to focus on today, the General Assembly and the Security Council. Now, the General Assembly is the world's most inclusive and democratic decision-making body. And while its resolutions carry significant moral and normative weight, they're ultimately non-binding upon its membership, which is a constant source of frustration. The General Assembly is also not always in session. However, the Security Council is. And let's compare that to the way the Security Council works. So the Security Council was, in many ways, it was a huge success, namely because one of the key reasons that the League of Nations failed is that it didn't have all of the major powers involved. US and Russia were not a part of it. So as one of the major preconditions, setting up this separate hierarchy allowed them all to join. And there hasn't been a single great power war since 1945. By some other metrics, the world's largest 40 economies haven't gone to war directly with one another since 1945. So there's been some major accomplishments. However, it's structurally unable to prevent the major powers, specifically the P5, from going to war and waging illegal wars of aggression or on minor states. It's really effective in preventing major wars and major power conflict. However, it doesn't. There aren't any restraints, or at least they're not the same restraints on the P5 as there are on the other states of the world. And what's really important to note, and I think often gets lost in this idea of the United Nations, is that the Charter sets up a strict hierarchy. There are 5 countries that are on an entirely different they have an entirely different set of rules and privileges that the rest don't have. And specifically the Security Council, which originally had just 11 members, but now it has 15 members. That Security Council has the ability to pass binding legislation upon, and all of its decisions can be enforced upon the entire body, the entire 193 member states. And there are about 60 countries that have never gotten a seat on the Security Council. So it's a hierarchical system, and in the event of if there's a conflict between a Security Council resolution and a national law, Article 103 outlines specifically that the Security Council resolution is going to take precedence. So not only is it binding, there's just this one sentence that basically set up a very small version of world government, where there is this ability to pass legally binding legislation upon the entire world. And you can imagine if the P5 were actually united, if they were on the same page, they could impose a lot of regulation upon the world rather than the fragmented system that we have. Now, probably the most controversial aspect of the Security Council and of the UN Charter itself would be the veto. So the way voting works within the Security Council, everything needs a 60% voting threshold, or 9 out of 15 for something to pass, including these 8 words. These are the 8 words that nearly prevented the United Nations Charter from being signed. It nearly cast the world back into chaos of World War II, back into this situation where we didn't have the United Nations, where we might have had competing systems. And these are the 8 words right here, including the concurring votes of the permanent members. So the charter itself doesn't mention a veto. These are the 8 words that gave rise to the veto. Now, in practice, the way the charter is written, the Security Council members are supposed to abstain from any decisions if they're a party to the dispute. So when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, the Security Council became seized of the issue, and they were trying to pass a resolution to stop it, but Russia vetoed that, and they've continued to veto since. And in that time, there have been 1.5 million casualties in the Ukraine war, which could have been the vast majority of those could have been prevented if we didn't have this veto power, if there was a way to override the veto. So this is a structural injustice. This is the most common complaint that we hear from member states about the UN system. There's only 3% of the membership, five states that are just 3% of the membership, that they can block the action and the will of the other 97%. And President Zelensky had a great quote that's on the screen there. But if this is something where the veto it's not an abstract philosophical debate about the best forms of government. This is something that has real effects, tangible impacts on people's lives. Take Palestine, for example. The Security Council has met formally 63 times since October 7th, 2023, to discuss Palestine. In the meantime, over 61,000 Palestinians have been killed. Indeed, their first meeting, the first major resolution, came just 20 days after the outbreak of that conflict. So it started on October 7th. On October 27th, the Security Council issued a resolution, or attempted to, calling for an immediate and sustained humanitarian truce and the cessation of hostilities. And yet that was vetoed. It was vetoed by the US. It was one of 7 vetoes since 2022, 7 times that the US has prevented action. And that has led to real world consequences and real lives lost. The Security Council has also met 45 times to discuss the Sudanese civil war, which began in 2019. And yet Russia ultimately vetoed action, leading to a situation where there's 150,000 lives lost. So from Palestine to Ukraine to Sudan to all around the world, this system of unilateral gridlock, its toll is measured in lives lost and inaction by the Security Council. So the composition of the Security Council, again, it's outlined under Article 23, but there's the 5 permanent members that sit at the top. They get a sort of a special smaller table that they get to sit at in perpetuity, metaphorically speaking. So China, Russia, the US, France, and the UK. And then there are 10 non-permanent members that rotate in on a 2-year basis. So again, there's been around 60 countries that have never, since the founding of the UN, gotten a chance to sit at this table. And again, every state gets to participate in the General Assembly, but the General Assembly can't pass binding resolutions. So the real power, the real seat of power, is the Security Council within the United Nations. And as the saying goes, if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu, or you can be. So following the veto, representational justice is probably the number 2 concern, or it's usually in the same breath as the veto. But representational justice, addressing this historical injustice where Africa, for example, only 4 out of 54 of the African Union states were sovereign at the time of the UN charters was signed, and only a handful have gotten to sit. So they're the group that's one of the most coherent and most vocal on this. And almost as like an afterthought, it seems, the very last part of this statement says that there should be equitable geographic distribution of membership. But again, it's so those seats are given out on they're elected by region, 5 elections every year. So that way there's a new group of 5 coming into the Security Council each year. And so then, only those 15 states at any given time get to really participate in the most meaningful body of the United Nations. Now, non-members can participate under Article 31, but they don't get to vote, even if they are especially affected. So if there's some issue that a state, that is a vital concern to one state, they can be invited to speak at the Security Council, but they don't get to vote. And the Security Council itself gets to decide whether or not their interests are specially affected. So they maintain a really tight control on the entire process, start to finish. Now, again, the charter was always meant to be a living document. It wasn't something that was supposed to be fixed and set for all time. And yet, for a host of reasons, that was the case. So if we're going to get back to history for a moment and just sort of look at some of the history of reform efforts from 1945 to today. Now, between 1945 and 1955, there was a lot of genuine optimism. This was the point in time where it was widely assumed that the Article 109 conference was going to happen in 1955, if not sooner. It was a period of time which states openly discussed giving up sovereignty on behalf of peace. Winston Churchill, John F. Kennedy, there's major powers that have some really great quotes about when asked, were they willing to give up some sovereignty in exchange for peace? Yes, they were. That was their answer. Now, even Albert Einstein wrote in 1947 that the United Nations, what he said is that the United Nations can't be blamed for its failures. No organization can be stronger than the constitutional powers given to it. And that specifically, he took issue with the veto and the way that the Security Council was set up, and called for a radical overhaul of the United Nations in this open letter that was pretty influential at the time. In 1955, believe it or not, there was this resolution passed. So in Article 109, paragraph 3, it states that if the review conference hasn't been invoked by 1955, that it'll get placed on the agenda of the General Assembly, which it was in November 21st, 1955. And they voted 43-6 to invoke Article 109. And this is the resolution on the screen here. It's very short. Resolution 992X. And so the only time that Article 109 has ever been brought up for a vote within the General Assembly, it has passed with overwhelming support, 87% of the members voting in favor. Six voted against. It was mostly the Soviet Union and Syria, and then there were 9 states that have abstained. Once this resolution passed the House, it was then sent for its legal and necessary concurrence in the Security Council, which it passed by a vote of 9-1. Excuse me. So in 1955, we were at a really pivotal moment, or what could have been a really pivotal moment, where the Article 109 Review Conference had been invoked. It had successfully passed the General Assembly, meeting its 2/3 threshold. Meeting its 2/3 threshold within the Security Council as well. And then it was all set to go. But what the powers did, they used what the P5 did at that time. By 1955, the U.S. had actually changed its position on Article 109. It no longer was in favor, though publicly it couldn't admit that. It voted for it in both the General Assembly and the Security Council. The UK was also against it privately, but publicly voted for it. So they used a tactic that's common to bureaucracies around the world to stall on the issue that they couldn't publicly be against. And that was they sent it to committee. So they set up at the same breath that they passed this resolution invoking Article 109, which could have been which was the chance for the world to completely get rid of the veto and rewrite the history of the world, really. Instead, they set up a committee and gave it the mandate to set a time and place for the conference, its organization and procedures. And they said, okay, go meet for 2 years and come back and report to the General Assembly and tell us how we should proceed. What are the specific rules? How should we operate? How should we go forward? And then when the Arrangements Committee met for 2 years from 1955 to 1957, they reported back their issue, and the General Assembly again said, okay, it's not an auspicious moment. The international circumstances aren't right. Why don't you go take another 2 years and report back to us? And this pattern would continue. They reported back in 1959, 1961, 1962, 63, 65, before finally issuing their final report in 1967. So this is the resolution on the screen here, the last resolution that mentions this committee specifically. And they changed one key provision. So in all of these other years, 57, 59, 61, and so on, the General Assembly kept reaffirming the commitment and then requested that the committee report back in a year or 2 years or so on. In this final one, in 1967, they just quietly removed that reporting requirement. So there was no requirement of any further action by the committee. However, it was decided that it be kept in being. So the committee eventually just stopped meeting because they felt that the time wasn't right, the political will wasn't there. And the chairman of the Arrangements Committee, when asked in 1968 to respond about what happened or what are the next steps for the committee, how do we take this forward, he said that any single member state could make a request to the Secretary General, who on basis of established procedure, which really means a majority vote in the General Assembly, could reactivate this committee. So this Arrangements Committee still exists. It's still legally available. It's still kept in being, and it was listed as in the UN yearbook as a committee that did not meet up until I think 2009 is when they stopped listing it. This resolution and Resolution 992X have been invoked in UN correspondence, and this is sort of like just a forgotten, like the ultimate nerdy UN nerd gem, where this committee was created. It passes the General Assembly, passed the Security Council. So I mean, I can't stress this enough. This committee still exists on paper, and it could be reactivated by a simple majority vote in the General Assembly, and then potentially go ahead and set a time and date for a review conference to happen. So this is a way of potentially even getting around the Security Council, a tactical way around. So if we were going to, we talked, the P5 will still retain their potential to veto at the ratification stage, but if the security, just to even get to there, we're still going to need, we need 2/3 of the General Assembly, we need 2/3 of the Security Council, and within the Security Council, those P5 have a lot of power. With just a small group of states to lean on, it's very easy for them to twist arms behind closed doors and make it so that it would be impossible for us to get to 9 out of 15 votes. So if that's the case, one other potential option for us, sort of an end around wild card, is to reactivate this arrangements committee, and to use this arcane, forgotten little committee to potentially change the course of history. All right, so from 1967 to present, basically nothing happened, really. They set up in 1974 the special committee, which sounds really fancy, except specifically in its mandate, it says that they are not able to discuss charter review. The possibility of review of the charter was specifically excluded from the mandate of this new committee. So it was almost like they were quietly shelving the one committee with the true power to act, and then setting up other means for states to discuss reform without actually having the ability to invoke this charter review process. That committee from 1974 continued to meet. It still continues to meet. In the modern era, we have the intergovernmental negotiations, are commonly referred to as the IGN track. We also have the General Assembly Revitalization Working Group. And most recently, we have a new working group that came out of the Secretary General's UN 80 work initiative to review the mandate system and cost cutting and so on. But these are sort of the main existing means or mechanisms for reform, processes for reform. And the intergovernmental negotiations, for example, have been, there hasn't been progress on them since, there hasn't been an amendment made to the charter itself, I think, for the past 50 years. So they've been really quite stuck. Now, the UN Charter actually has been amended on 5 previous occasions through Article 108, which is its other means of changing the charter through a very narrow scope. So in 1965, they enlarged the Security Council from 11 to 15 members. In 1965, they changed the voting threshold at the same time to reflect that larger pool. And then they also had in 1965, 68, and 73, 3 other minor changes. Now the fourth one in 1968 is important is really critical because it helps reinforce some of the legal validity to the Arrangements Committee. So in 1968, Article 109 was amended to reflect the change in the enlarged Security Council. So if you recall, paragraph 1 of Article 109 lists that it needs a 2/3 vote in the General Assembly, and it's originally said 7 members of the Security Council. That was then changed to 9 out of 15 when the Security Council was enlarged. Now, at that same time, there were those who tried to get rid of the rest of Article 109 entirely, including paragraph 3, which was paragraph 3 is the part of Article 109 that gave rise to the Arrangements Committee. However, it was ruled at that time that they could not strike down Article 109, paragraph 3, because it was legally unfinished. It was partially implemented, but not fully, and that basically, because it had been acted upon and not sort of finalized or carried through, that they weren't able to change it. So in paragraph 3, it actually still is unchanged to this day. All right, so when I started talking about Article 109 maybe 6 years ago, I really it felt like I needed to explain why these reforms were needed. I think today there's not really anybody who thinks that the status quo is working. I really haven't had to focus on that part of this as much. But I mean, clearly the Security Council is failing to meet the goals and the needs of the 21st century. The structure is fundamentally unjust. These three individuals here were the key architects: Stalin, Churchill, and Roosevelt. They were born in 1878, 1874, and 1882. So the current system that we're working with in 2025 was designed by a small group of wealthy white men who were born over 140 years ago. I mean, they were born, the world that they grew up in was so fundamentally different than the world of today. And their worldview was immersed in that world that they grew up in. So it's like any operating system, like any the UN Charter really needs to be updated to its review is long overdue. It was supposed to just last 10 years, the current structure with the P5, with the veto and everything, and yet here we are 80 years later, and we still have not made good on that San Francisco promise. The UN is supposed to, the Security Council specifically is charged with the maintenance of international peace and security, and explicitly for reducing armaments and the cost of armaments. Whereas today, I mean, military spending has ballooned to $2.7 trillion, and the collective waste of resources, time, and energy, and engineers who are working in the military-industrial complex is a gross injustice and profound disservice to the 25,000 people, including 10,000 children, that the UN estimates die every single day due to preventable hunger and malnutrition causes. So, I mean, we're continuing to spend $2.7 trillion annually on defense, and at the expense of all the other things that we could be doing with that. For no other reason. Originally, the greatest and strongest calls for UN reform were related to nuclear weapons. The anti-nuclear movement was a particularly strong proponent of reforming the United Nations. I mean, if just 5% of our global stockpiles were fired, it would end all complex forms of life on Earth. If just a fraction of a percentage were fired, about 100 nuclear weapons, the atmospheric effects would be so bad that it would create an ice age, basically a nuclear winter, where an estimated 2 billion individuals would die. And there have been several well-documented near misses where you can think back to the Cuban Missile Crisis, where we were very close to nuclear annihilation, and yet key individuals made choices to not fire. So we've been on the we've been closer to the threshold than we've ever really appreciated. And Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. noted in 1964 that the alternative to strengthening the United Nations and thereby disarming the whole world may well be civilization plunged into the abyss of annihilation. So, this is something that today is sort of a lost, it's not a mainstream cause, but prominent leaders throughout history were very much in favor. And also it was just so much more a part of the discourse. Other reasons why we need charter reform: lethal autonomous weapon systems have a whole host of negative effects. The weaponization of space. We have 2,000 satellites and other objects of interest being tracked, and we have so much more important business to be concerning ourselves with, from achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So these were a set of 17 goals set up that were supposed to be achieved by 2030. We're not on track to meet any of them. And worse yet, when it comes to the planetary boundaries, so even we've exceeded the what's considered the safe boundary of our planet in 6 out of 9 different planetary boundaries, meaning that we're in entirely uncharted territory where we don't really actually know what the effects are going to be on wildlife. We're causing animals and plants to die out at rates that are 1,000 times higher than the baseline extinction rate, basically a rate that was not seen since the meteors wiped out the dinosaurs. According to the World Wildlife Fund, 68% of all wildlife on Earth has been lost, including 83% of wild mammals, 80% of marine mammals, and 50% of plant life. Each of these species is something that not only leaves the world a little less wild, but the cure for cancer, Alzheimer's, who knows what else we could be losing at the same time. And we're not on track to meet. We've actually crossed the 1.5 degree Celsius threshold, and that plus some of the other issues are leading states to actually take initiatives into their own hands. So if anyone's read The Ministry for the Future, you can tell that this does not end well. We have some states that are attempting to cloud seed, and we have all host of issues that were never thought of by the founders of the UN Charter. The Charter itself doesn't even mention the word environment. It was pre-nuclear, it was pre-digital, it was pre-AI, and globally. So we just did a poll, and of the people who have some knowledge of the UN, 73% said that it needed reform, and this was something that was pretty uniform. There wasn't actually we did a poll with 101 states around the world. There was not a single one that had a net positive view of the United Nations. So not only is it not working, it's fundamentally not working, and everyone sort of agrees on that. Enter the Article 109 coalition. So the Arrangements Committee and the General Assembly was constantly talking about these auspicious circumstances, that it wasn't the time, it wasn't, the circumstances weren't right. Well, we're deciding that the proper international circumstances are not something that will just magically show up if we wait for them. There's something that we need to create. And the Article 109 is a growing coalition of diplomats, legal scholars, activists that are now working to breathe life back into the Article 109, to this lost but never used, potentially transformative mechanism for change. So our mission is to mobilize UN member states to call the conference to update the UN Charter as outlined in Article 109. Our vision is to make the world, to empower the UN so that it can actually deliver on its core functions, from peace and security to the climate crisis, to more equitably distributing power around the world, and even to making, to being a more multi-stakeholder and inclusive organization. We got our start in Nairobi in May of 2024. This actually was part of the Summit of the Future. It was one of the impact coalitions from the Summit of the Future, originally called the Impact Coalition for Charter Reform. And quickly we started to gain a little bit of momentum. We've gotten the presidents of South Africa, India, and Brazil in 2024 to call for an Article 109 conference, being the first 3 heads of state to do so in the modern memory. We've been growing as a civil society movement. We now have more than 40 organizations that have joined, including the Club de Madrid, which includes 100 former heads of state. And just to give you some context and just to reflect, this was us in September of last year. We were just a group of volunteers with a dream. Like, I mean, we had no money. We didn't really have any prospects or momentum. And yet 1 year later, we've been able to launch this coalition, and which we just rebranded to Article 109 and relaunched in September. And we've been getting positive reactions from groups and individuals all over the world. We've got, our team has been in every room that we can be in. We've gotten, this is the ambassador from the Gambia, who is really, Gambia is one of the most recent states to endorse the Article 109 coalition. But again, we went from a group that looked like this on a Zoom, as a hope and a dream and no funding in March of 2024 to now we've received close to $1.7 million in funding. We've transitioned to a formal secretariat with staff. We've hired diplomats. We've hired some former UN undersecretaries general that are out there engaging on our behalf. And support has been growing. So we've also, this idea has been endorsed by the UN Secretary General's high-level board on effective multilateralism. We've gotten lots and lots of former heads of state, including 24 former presidents of the General Assembly have just endorsed the idea of Article 109 as a group. We're getting lots and lots of positive feedback. We've met with more than 70 delegations out of out of 193 member states. We've briefed more than 70 of them on Article 109. We're getting a lot of positive feedback. And then at the most recent General Assembly in September, the amount of official sponsors doubled from the 3 states I mentioned earlier. We also had the Gambia and Kazakhstan join the call. And we've gotten some, as well as North Macedonia and some other key allies. At the General Assembly, according to our own internal speech analysis, which I ran, there were 148 states that called for UN reform, that used their speech to mention or discuss. 78% of the membership called for UN reform at the General Assembly this past year, just a month ago. That was higher than the number of states that talked about climate change, higher than the number of states that discussed Palestine, which was 138, or Ukraine. So, I mean, this is something where the vast majority of the membership knows that something needs to be done, and the calls for action have been growing louder and louder. Our timeline, this is what we're hoping for. It's not something that's set in stone, but our focus for 2026, we're working on establishing a cross-regional group of friends. Actually, just this morning, we met with 14 leaders from CARICOM, the Caribbean Regional IGO, who were extremely excited about this idea, including some of them wanting to join the group of friends. In 2027, we're hoping to use that group of friends as a means of bringing forward a vote at the General Assembly, whether it's 2027, 2028. These things it's a fluid timeline, but we're sort of anticipating, or at least shooting for, a new UN charter to be in place by 2030. Now, the reason we're choosing 2030, one, because these things take time. It's to build these auspicious circumstances. There's a lot of effort, a lot of behind the scenes work, but also the Sustainable Development Goals expire in 2030. So not only are we not going to achieve them, they're going to expire, and a reformed UN charter is one potential way of replacing, of actually achieving them, but also to replace them in that time period. So the process for replacing the post SDG agenda begins in 2027 and 2028, and that's when we're going to be hopefully really have this idea socialized and have a lot more support. But right now, it's hard to gauge sort of objectively, but we've got a ton of momentum. It really feels like we're making a difference, and states are they're excited. I mean, Article 109 is not something that people get right away. It's a pretty arcane and obscure part of a field where it's hard to get people interested in general. But once the delegates, so even the vast majority of the UN representatives, so official ambassadors and permanent representatives to the United Nations, have never heard of Article 109 prior to our briefings. Some of them have. There's a few that are history buffs or previously worked for the UN, previously were academics and so on, and that's usually been our key constituency. But even the diplomats themselves haven't heard of this before. So what we're trying to do is really, really get the idea out there, and the more that we're doing it, the more it's almost universally met with skepticism, then curiosity, and then excitement. So we've had these earlier processes, these reform efforts, the IGN, they've been going on for decades without any change happening. So this is something that's new and exciting for diplomats, within the UN space. And our approach so far has been primarily member state focused. So we've briefed nearly 30% of the UN membership. It's actually went up quite a bit today. And we've got 2 other roundtables with the Africa group and a cross-regional group later this month. So probably by the end of the month, we'll be over, I would say, probably 85 to 90 states total briefed. That part of our strategy is by far the most well-developed. It's what we've been leaning into. But the other aspects are extremely, we haven't had the capacity. I mean, we didn't even have a website just 7 weeks ago. We didn't have a website. I actually owned the domain Article 109 for years prior to this whole effort starting, but it was just sitting there until just this past September. We actually were able to launch our website. So the other aspects of our strategy beyond the member state side, where things are going really well on the member state side, but we also envision this being a broader movement of civil society organizations, of young people who have the most to gain from this change. They're the ones that have to deal with this system, with climate change, with all these negative effects far more than other groups. So that's one of the reasons why I'm really excited to close this portion of our of this talk and really open up begin the interactive section. I will open it up now for questions before we go ahead. So yeah, any questions, thoughts, reaction to what we've just heard? Maybe I'll stop sharing for a minute so I can see everybody. Have we gotten questions in the chat or the Q&A either?
There are no questions yet in the chat or Q&A.
All right. Well, if anyone, yeah, go ahead. If you've got a question, feel free to just unmute and turn on your video, and you can ask away. And then after this, we've got some discussion questions that we can reflect on, and we're going to be using a Mentimeter to sort of gather and capture all those responses and ideas.
I have a question.
Yeah.
This is Summer. Hi, Summer Marion at Bentley University. Hi, Justin. It's great to see you. And thank you so much for your presentation. I'm here with about 20 students at Bentley in Waltham, Massachusetts. And my question is, I would love to hear more about the role that you envision young people, and in particular, you know, sort of the goal of this program to have a town hall specifically targeting college students. What type of organizing are you hoping to motivate among them? And, you know, what inspiration do you hope they'll take from this to support the movement on their own?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So this is something that we've been discussing, but you know, we haven't been able to work on. We just haven't had the capacity to work on the civil society and the student outreach aspect of our strategy. So actually, if it might make most sense now if we could turn to our two student presenters who can actually say a little bit more about this. So Antonia, do you want to go ahead and so yeah, let me just explain a little bit about how the second half of this will work. So we've got two student presenters, and they'll both go ahead and present some of what some of these programs which will help answer your question, Summer. And I think it'd be great to hear from the students, from their perspective, how they've been involved to this point. So Antonia is going to talk a little bit about the Model UN conference that was run in Brazil. There was, I know it was between 200 and 500 participants, where they did a mock UN conference. But I won't say anymore. You go ahead and take it from there.
Thank you, Justin, very much. So hi, everyone. My name is Antonia. I am a Brazilian international relations student. And we'll talk a little bit about my two main experience on researching and acting on Article 101, 109. The first of was FAMUN. FAMUN is our model United Nations. We are one of the largest models in the country, with participants from both high school and university. And this year, I think in total, we had around 600 participants on our simulation. And we brought the topic of the UN Charter reform in two different committees. The Youth Council, where the delegates had the opportunity to represent themselves and bring together the demands and visions of the Brazilian youth, and the General Assembly, where the participants would represent a state's delegation and test the tension between idealism and political realism. Both committees would either discuss the reform of Chapter 5, which discusses the Security Council, its composition, and its works, or the Preamble and Chapter 1, which brings the pillars, principles, and purposes of the United Nations. We also did the Charter Reform Challenge, which was an opportunity to the delegations to create a video of 2 minutes with their view and proposals for a reform UN Charter. It was really, really fun. But in my actual experience, I was a member of the Secretariat of FAMUN, which means I participated in the elaboration of the research materials and also was a chair of one of the committees. I mediated the General Assembly for high schoolers, discussing the Preamble and Chapter 1. For me, I believe that discussion of the Preamble and Chapter 1 was the one I was most excited to see, because since Justin said, the reform of the Security Council is not a new topic, it's not a new subject. Actually, it started even before the charter itself was signed. So it was easy to predict what will come from the discussion of the Chapter 5. However, this is not the case of the Preamble and Chapter 1, that for me are the most important parts of the charter. because no true reform comes if you don't change the basis. No true reform comes if you don't change the values, the purposes, and the foundation that guides all decisions. And that's why it's so important to discuss the reform under Article 109 in my perspective, because Article 109 brings this possibility to change everything from its basis. And on that matter, I was so happily surprised with my committee. I had around 60 students from high school. They were probably under 17 years, most of them. And I have never worked with high schoolers before, especially in Model UN. And I have to say, they came more prepared than most university students that I know. They came with printed charters, with the text highlighted and scribbled, and they came ready. They studied the text deeply on its content and structure and came up with so many interesting perspectives. This actually shows me how important initiatives such as FAMUN are, because it shows us how the youth is actually ready to partake on this kind of debate. They are ready to learn, they are ready to participate, and they are ready to debate these complex questions, and they have proposals, very interesting proposals. And actually, they should participate. We cannot leave everything in the hands of the states, because no great change will come from those inside the problem. To come up with innovative solutions, we need parties that are able to look from the outside of the created structures. That's why it's so important to include the youth in the debate of the UN Charter reform, to participate in this debate, because it is from us, the youth, the civil society, the academia, that most innovative solutions will come for a new United Nations. So this is actually my main view of FAMUN. I have a second experience that is actually my bachelor's thesis. I doing about the UN Charter reform on a perspective of small islands and developing states. My project starts from a simple but very powerful question, that is, how can small islands and developing states influence the reform of the UN Charter? To answer this, I examined how these states, which are disproportionately affected by climate change, have used their collective diplomacy to advocate not only for environmental action, but also for institutional change within the UN. The research begins with a historical background of the UN Charter itself, very similar with what Justin just did for us now. I analyze how the charter was negotiated in 1945 in a context where less than a quarter of today's UN members were represented, and where the major powers largely dictated the institutional design of the organization. Because of that, many voices, especially from small and colonized countries, such as small islands, were excluded from the negotiations. The second part of my research moved to the SIDS, that Small Islands and Developing States group, that was officially recognized in 1992. And this group, despite their limited material resources, they have become key players in global environmental diplomacy through what we call niche diplomacy. That is a strategy of small states where they focus their foreign policy and limited diplomatic capacity on a specific area of expertise, that in case of small islands and developing states is the environmental agenda. In recent decades, these islands have used this diplomatic strength to bring climate change into the Security Council agenda, arguing that climate crisis is not only an environmental issue, but a security threat. And this is a movement that we call as climate securitization. Their main objective of this is to use the legally binding characteristic of Security Council's resolution to demand stronger actions from member states to fight climate change, because for them it's a matter of existence and life and death. Many of the Pacific Islands lose significant part of their territory because of rising of sea level. They are strongly affected in their economy. I actually managed to have some interviews when I was in New York in September, and the ambassador of Barbados actually told me that last year they had to use 40% of their GDP to recover from the side effects of a tropical storm. The storm didn't even affect the island itself, but the waves destroyed their whole fishing fleet, and they had to build from the ground, and they lost 40% of the GDP on this effort. And however, they tried this strategy with the Security Council, but they have a very big problem with low representation in the council itself. From 49 to 2025, only 10 seats have occupied a non-permanent seat, despite representing 20% of the whole UN membership. And that's why they moved their focus to the idea of working simultaneously on L69, the African Union, and in CARICOM to try to bring the reform of the Security Council to gain more representation and bring the climate change officially under Security Council agenda. In the meantime, they created together with this, especially with L69, a proposal to create a dedicated seat for seats in the Security Council to guarantee full-time representation. And finally, on the conclusion of my monograph, I tried to connect this institutional debate with the broader idea of reforming the charter. My study highlights the emergency of Article 109 coalition and how the demands of seats could be achieved through the coalition goal of invoking a general conference for the revision of the charter. And through their individual statements in different international major events, and from these interviews that I made while I was in New York, I tried to point how favorable would seats adherence to the coalition initiative be. I see the Article 109 coalition as the opportunity to seats to embed environmental protection and climate action within the very foundations of the United Nations, and therefore in the mandate of a reformed Security Council.
Oh, well, that's excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that, Antonia. Yeah, really, really exciting research. So what you just heard, just to recap a little bit, is there's two ways that if you're a student out there right now and you're listening to this, that you can get involved. One, we're actually looking to roll out, if you're involved in Model UN or if that's something that you're interested in, Drea Bergman, who's on the call from CGS, we're working with Antonia's professor, Patricia Rinaldi, to draft, to basically make an interactive online module, so that way any Model UN club around the world can basically do the same thing that the Brazilian students just went through, that they could do a mock UN Model UN conference, or a Model UN Plus conference, where you change the rules of the Model UN, maybe you get rid of the veto or something like that, and then you see, okay, can states actually negotiate a better deal on climate, on poverty, on X, Y, and Z if we change these one factor of the charter, or doing as the Brazilian students did, do a whole mock Model 109 conference. The second way is to do an independent research project, to get to talk to one of your professors at your school, either if you have some sort of if you're taking a class that might allow a longer term research project, or you can approach them to do individual individual research projects as well. So that's two different ways. And now we're going to turn to Angelica from the University of San Francisco, who I'm really excited to hear from. They've just gone, they're in the process, or you'll get the latest of setting up a Students for Article 109 chapter at their university. So take it away, Angelica.
Hello, thank you, Justin. Hello, everyone. My name is Angelica Aquino, and I'm a senior at the University of San Francisco. I'm a major in economics, and I'm minoring in hospitality management. I am the president of Students for Article 109 at our university, which is a new student organization set for being launched by the end of this month. So let me dive in on a bit of the process and everything we've worked on this semester for students for Article 109. So Article 109 was initially introduced to me and my Foundations of Organizational Behavior class through Dr. Parlamis, who's here right now. And through her, I was able to learn about a little bit about what Article 109 kind of stands for, and all of that. So kind of motivation for me to be a part of this and to kickstart something as strong as this is due to the fact that, as a college student and seeing all these societal challenges, having a lot of discussions in my econ classes about these pressing issues in the world, I felt like I had to just sitting around and not doing anything I wasn't going to cut it anymore. So I thought that this opportunity that Dr. Parlamis presented to us in our Foundations of OB class was a great way for me to kind of grow my impact in the world and contribute to a lot of change as a young person, as a college student, and all of that sorts of things. So a little bit about kind of what the class is all about. So it's structured in a way where we have these weekly think tanks to work on getting an Article 109 organization launched on campus. And we're also able to use that time to come up with an event that we could hold this semester. So a lot of those weekly think tanks that we have in our OB class, apart from all the OB lectures that we learn in there, we're also working on Article 109 event planning and also kickstarting the organization. So kind of the first wave that we've gone through in the beginning of the semester was to submit a constitution to the school. And then we had a logo that we created, as well as a membership roster that we've grown. So that first initial wave was done to kind of have the materials up and running so that the school is able to get this new student organization to be submitted and fully recognized in this current cycle. And then our second kind of phase during our think tanks are the event planning aspects of it. So we've been back and forth. It's been a little hectic in our meetings, but we've come up with the idea to do a film screening that's open to our campus on the Vito directed by Tim Slade. So in our think tanks, we kind of have this bureaucracy going where we have people working on marketing. So we have flyers being made. We have people on social media. So we've launched a social media account for Students for Article 109. We've created RSVP forms for that event. We've done we have an interest form ready and set up for people who want to join. So we have more membership opportunities for people who still have not heard of it yet. We have a promotional video that people in our class have made, and all of that sorts of things. A lot of what I've been doing right now is just emailing the school back and forth, being in contact with a lot of our departments that can help really make our organization an actual established student-led organization at our school, so that we're able to receive funding, not from the school, so we could kickstart, I guess, spreading awareness as much as we can about Article 109. And so it's been really hectic. It's been crazy. And just a little side note, a lot of my classmates are not a full member at the organization, but their extra hands is super important in getting this kickstarted. I feel like if it weren't for this allotted time in class, we wouldn't be able to get as much done as we could now. And these people come from a lot of different backgrounds and majors. We have marketing majors. We have a lot of different people who can help, even if they're not fully a part of their interest in Article 109. Their expertise is still like of huge value to us. And yeah, so that's pretty much all that we've done, and it's been really cool and exciting, and looking forward to the spring semester. We're hoping to increase our membership, so getting people on board with Article 109. We need people to know about what it is and hopefully get the funding to do more cool events that can, you know, inspire others. So that's that. Thank you guys.
That's great. That's great. Thank you so much, Angelica, for that. That's really great to hear. So they're prototyping the first, campus chapter around the world for Article 109. We're hoping that it'll be something that will be replicated in other universities and potentially high schools as well. So, all right. So I hope that gave you just a little sense, Summer, with regard to, so those are three ways that students can sort of start engaging with 109. But I've got a whole list of other ideas, but I want before I sort of so here we go. I don't want to pre-bias anyone else's ideas for this, but so we've got a couple of questions that we're going to ask through this Mentimeter tool. So what you can do to is scan that QR code, and then there's a series of questions that we're going to ask, and your responses are going to show up on the screen. And once you scan that QR code, you can go ahead and, so this first question is about if an Article 109 review conference were held today, what would you like to see included? What would you want to see a new UN Charter address, whether it's getting rid of the veto, whether it's addressing having a safe and stable climate, getting the world below 1.5 degrees and back on course, regulation of AI, anything really. It can really be anything at all. So go ahead and scan that QR code, and we're going to be collecting responses. This is actually, we've asked this at a couple of different events. We're accumulating all the different responses. So they should show up on there, and then you can actually vote. Even if if you don't have any ideas or you're still thinking, you can go ahead and sort of upvote or vote on the existing answers that have been put up there. So we can kind of get a sense of what student priorities are, or what, just any ideas that you think a new UN could address. And yeah, so I'll stop talking for a couple minutes to give you guys a couple minutes to reflect. We were going to do breakout rooms, but I don't think we have enough people to really make that make sense. So we'll just do this all together. There we go. Now the responses are rolling in. A lot of veto. Yep. Talking about veto, refugee and immigration crises. That's something I did a presentation at Johns Hopkins University recently, and their faculty, humanitarian health faculty, and they had some really, really interesting answers I never thought of around refugee resettlement. What do you do with stateless people? Right now, the UN Charter doesn't have any way for stateless people to be represented, or how will it address states that currently exist that are about to go underwater? There's some states that that have a UN member vote, that are, official UN member states that may not physically have territory anymore. And how is the UN going to address that? Climate refugees. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, so I mean, again, the way the Article 109 conference would work, it's really broad. Any aspect of the UN Charter could be changed. Anything could be added. We could have an entire section on revamping something, setting up an Earth Council to keep us within our 9 planetary boundaries. You could imagine a world where we get rid of the Security Council and empower that that vote to United Nations General Assembly. Or one idea that's gaining a lot of popularity, a lot of traction, is this idea of a United Nations Parliamentary Assembly, which would be directly elected potentially. It could initially start as an advisory body, the same way the European Parliament did, but then eventually be given powers. I'm gonna just see if we can move that up there. There we go. Yeah, okay, so we've got a lot of great responses here. Thank you for everyone who's participated. Yep, peacekeeping forces. It's really interesting to kind of reflect upon. The UN was supposed to actually have its own army, and so was the League of Nations before it. Neither ended up manifesting. But actually, the state of Denmark, one of their diplomats, told us recently that the reason that their state didn't initially join NATO back when it was set up initially was that they were waiting on the UN peacekeeping army to sort of be developed, and then it never was. Yeah, okay, so we've got some great responses here. Now I'm going to go ahead and switch to our next question. Excuse me. And this is sort of the real reason why we're here. Here we go. There we go. So beyond, you've heard sort of 3 ways that students could get involved, and I've got a list that I'll share in a second. But I'm really interested in just brainstorming as a group right now, if we can take a few minutes to do this. From your perspective, how do you think students could help get involved in Article 109? I know it's a lot to take in, and especially I'm sure for the vast majority of you, this is the first time you're even hearing of this kind of a little bit out there plan to reform the United Nations. But right now, our current member strategy, our member state strategy engagement is going pretty well, but we really envision a broader movement, especially when it comes to ratification. Even if we're successful in invoking Article 109, eventually that new charter is going to be sent out to all the capitals of the world to get ratified. So it'll need to go through, like in the US, it'll need to go through our Senate to get approval. So to get Senate approval, you're going to need bipartisan, a big movement of people that are pushing for it to pass. So we really envision students as being a key component of our broader strategy for pressuring states to join, for getting the word out there, lobbying your local representatives, and so on. And here we go. Yep. Spreading the word, lobbying, advocacy, letter writing. Yeah, letter writing is definitely one of the ones that Dr. Parlamas and I have discussed, potentially having some sort of a students for Article 109, like a student drafted letter, where then we would try to get, once we figured out what kind of language to use, then we would try to get as many signatures from students all around the world sort of endorsing this idea, which could ultimately have 2 purposes, especially if we had multiple letter campaigns. If we had one for students, and then maybe there's an academic letter or just like a general letter. it would be a great activity for student clubs to engage in, to go out there and collect signatures, to spread it on social media and try to get, ideally thousands or potentially millions of signatures. There's actually some governments around the world have means of, getting resolutions, having citizen petitions actually get on state ballots and things like that. So in Massachusetts, for example, if you gather enough signatures, you could see something like this actually get put on a state ballot and try to have the entire state of Massachusetts endorse the Article 109. So signature gathering, to me, and letter writing, signature gathering, that's something that has multiple effects. And yep, digital advocacy, definitely. Oh, I love this idea of teach-ins, student research projects like we've been hearing about. And like we heard from Angelica, they're going to be hosting, they're going to be having a screening of a film called The Veto. So, having these different student chapters, that having a film screening is definitely a great way to, to get to engage with these ideas. Posters, yep. Inviting guest speakers, yeah. One idea that I'm particularly drawn to is that students might be involved in, or maybe it's professors, but like hosting debates or Oxford-style debates where we would find someone who's, it's not very hard to find actually, someone opposed to the idea of Article 109, and someone, we have either students or professors debate them publicly and really get these ideas out there. Or the debates could focus around, rather than just whether we should do Article 109 or not, but actually what the new charter could look like, what sorts of things should be included. Yeah, training for direct advocacy. So yeah, direct advocacy is one that it does require some training, though I think students can be effective lobbyists without too much training. Just getting the idea out there in front of different people. So I'm going to collect all of these different ideas, and Dr. Parlemis and I are going to really use this as sort of the launching point to work on our student engagement strategy and our university engagement strategy. So thank you for everyone who's contributing. We're gonna take this, and it's gonna be going folded directly into our advocacy efforts. I want to pause again and just open it back up for anyone who's got questions. I've got another Mentimeter exercise that we can do, but again, I just wanted to see if we can open up the floor and if there was any other questions or ideas that, just reflections on anything you've heard, anything at all. And while we wait for questions, I'm gonna see if any of the ideas on my list weren't covered. One idea that I had, or at least that I wanted to explore with students, is discussing different ideas for how we can connect and build a student-to-student sort of peer-to-peer network. Excuse me. Yeah. This back on the screen. So what I wanted to know, and we'll open it back up for questions at any, you can feel free to ask at any time, but I want to know, like, on a practical, tactical basis, how are our students connecting with one another? What are some of the tools that you could use to connect, of course, organize, to connect across universities? We've got students in Brazil who are engaged now, San Francisco, and now Bentley and Brown. How do we maybe I'm a little bit dated, but for me, I was thinking about setting up a subreddit community like that where we can upvote ideas. But I want to hear from you, just what else, social media, yeah, and what, if there's any platforms you're specifically on. I don't know if the idea of Discord would be using. Yep, newsletter linking different universities. Yep, yeah, that's definitely something that we're trying to do. I'm getting a lot of votes for Slack here. That's great. Okay. WhatsApp as well. Yep. Yeah, I mean, we've considered creating some sort of a 109 student action hub, like, but it doesn't seem, whether, I don't know if we necessarily have to reinvent the wheel with all these different things out there, but ideally we would be setting up something where students can really take it and run with it. That's where the coalition itself doesn't have to weigh in and approve all this, that it can really be student-led, student-operated ways of connecting and so on. Oops. I don't know what's going on there, but anyway, so thank you so much for all those ideas. And again, we're collecting everything and plan on consolidating all these different ideas into our university engagement strategy in the coming weeks and months. But again, I wanted to just open it back up for questions, if or reflections or just anything from the group. I can see someone coming up.
I don't want to dominate, but it's Summer Marion here at Bentley again. I could throw one out there. I'd love to hear, beyond skepticism, what are the most common points of opposition that you have come up against in these briefings? And how do you think we can, or how are you thinking about different points of leverage for overcoming those?
Yeah. So the biggest, sorry, the biggest concern that we are getting and the biggest pushback relates to the P5. Almost every skeptical diplomat that we're engaging with, that's where they're coming from. Okay, well, this is well and good, but at the end of the day, the P5 are gonna block this from happening. So most of them don't know that the actual conference itself cannot be vetoed from happening. And then once it's going, it's going to really take a life of its own. I mean, I think at that stage, it's going to have a lot of momentum that'll be pretty hard for the P5 to resist, to actually block the outcome. But that's the number one question that we get is, okay, well, what are you going to do with the P5 veto? This is all great and in theory, but at the end of the day, the powers are not going to want to give up that special privilege that they have. So then, that's for those who are particularly skeptical, that's the end of the issue for them. What we've been testing a couple of different narratives for how to respond. But to my mind, the biggest one is really leaning into this fact that that P5 actually have something to gain from the new UN Charter. That it's not something where this is not an exercise in taking away their power, even though that is going to be part of it. I mean, to build a functioning UN, we can't have a single state that can block action, block the will of the rest of the world. But you could imagine, right? What does the P5 actually gain with their veto power? Really, they can block action. They can't actually make things happen. They could if they were unified, but that veto special power really is only something that blocks action. It can't like create a movement on climate change. It can't like help us regulate AI. They could block those things, but if it's in everyone's interest to have a safe climate, a stable climate, and to have predictable weather, to have predictable tariffs, things like that, all of which could be regulated and standardized in a UN charter. So the P5 actually to find the balance of framing so that they can view that they're gaining something from this, not just giving up their power, I think is a big part of it. Though it's also I've also framed this as a potential win-win scenario. So either the P5 get on board once we're there, that they're this process is started, they can't veto it from happening, and then they don't want to stay on the sidelines. They want to shape this process. So either they're going to contribute and sort of get on board and commit to not vetoing, or what we could do is at the end of the day, if we can get enough unity and consensus among the membership to say, if the P5 veto, we're going to go ahead and implement the treaty without them. That fundamentally the world has changed in such a vast, such a major way from 1945. In 1945, 1955, we didn't really have this option. We couldn't. The world was really much more reliant upon those major powers. Today, we're not so. The 188 states that are not the P5, they collectively account for 75% of global emissions. So if we were going to, if for some reason all P5 didn't join, which I think is highly unlikely, the rest of the world could go ahead with this and implement it as a standalone treaty. And that would be one way of I feel like that threat alone would be enough to get the P5 to join on board. But basically, we don't have to wait for them and to be held hostage. Our future does not have to be held hostage to the veto anymore. If the states are able to muster the political will to move forward without Russia, for example, or without the US. The UK and France are almost certainly going to join. I think China will as well, just based on their statements. They're pretty much on the hook. They've been supporting these efforts, especially with regard to the global South and amongst the G77. So I think they will join. But that's probably the number one issue we get. We get a lot of practical questions about like how this would actually work, who we're funded by, to try to make sure that it's not some pet project of this particular state. So we actually, as a coalition, we don't take funding from governments, only from the private sector, to sort of preserve a degree of autonomy in that regard. But mostly we're met with skepticism, a little confusion, and then once it sets in, there's a lot of cautious optimism amongst the states. So yeah, those are some of the major questions that we get. Any other questions?
Professor, I have
Philip.
one quick question. Thanks for the presentation, obviously. Actually, it didn't occur to me until now that actually prompting non-veto powers to potentially even form their own NGOs is a pretty powerful response to, I think, a lot of the skepticism. But I mean, obviously, the first priority is, if possible, reform the UN. To what extent are you then potentially proposing to skeptics that in the event that the veto powers of the Big Five do actually oppose, we might even we think it's a possibility that we might even create a new organization to some degree with the other 188 or whatever members of the UN?
That's not something that we're discussing frequently. That's something that's more that's more of like our kind of down the line strategy here. We're really focusing in the, because that issue is something that might happen in 2030 or 2032 potentially, like once we're actually at the stage of ratification. So we do need to have a concerted response for that. We need to be ready and have that answer. But we're primarily focused, at least in the short term, of just getting this idea out there and generating this momentum. So that isn't an idea that's been tested widely with states at this point. And go. Okay. So I just want to quickly, unless there are any other questions, I want to just share a couple ways that people can get involved. So we have a newsletter. You can scan this QR code. It's going to take you to our newly launched website where we've got a newsletter that you can sign up for. You can also register to sign up as a volunteer with the coalition. So we currently are collecting interest in terms of volunteers. We don't have a way of meaningfully integrating volunteers on a day-to-day basis at this exact moment. We're actually in the process of hiring someone who's going to be managing our civil society mobilization at this time. So once they come on board, probably in the next few weeks, we're looking into the next year to really ramp up our volunteer engagement, university engagement, student engagement, and civil society mobilization more broadly. But you can follow us on LinkedIn. That's where we've got most of our content, engaging with the stuff that we've got there. And yeah, I mean, you're welcome. Definitely feel free to reach out to me over email if you've got any other questions or there's any ideas you've had. But yeah, so we're on LinkedIn. That's our website. You can scan to follow us there. If you're interested in sort of prototyping, setting up a student campus chapter at your university, let us know. Shoot us an email or sign up on the volunteer form and note that, and we can, we haven't gotten the program to that stage yet, but if you're interested in prototyping that, we can work with you at your university to try to help set that up. And yeah, so just keep the conversation going. That's my biggest ask, my biggest takeaway from everyone is that once you've had some time to sort of digest these ideas and take them into consideration, bring them back into your classroom. Ask questions of your professors about this. 9 times out of 10, they're not going to have any idea what you're talking about. But that's a key point of advocacy. We were really starting from scratch. There isn't a lot of knowledge out there. So please take this back to your universities and yeah. Feel free to reach out, and thank you again. Especially thank you to Antonia and Angelica for joining us. Your your interventions were most welcome. It was wonderful to hear from both of you, and I'll close it there.